The plywood briefing room smelled of stale sweat, ozone, and cheap coffee. A dozen Tier 1 operators stared at the topographical map, silently doing the math of a suicide mission. Then the SEAL captain asked a desperate question. One woman stood. She didn't shout. She just whispered her call sign. The air conditioner in the corner of the briefing room had been dying for a week. It produced a rhythmic, metallic death rattle that chewed at the nerves of everyone sitting in the folding chairs. Outside, the rain was coming down in sheets, turning the forward operating base into a sea of red mud. Nora Kelly sat in the back row, her boots propped on the chair in front of her. She held a styrofoam cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago. Her flight suit was stained with grease and sweat, clinging to her shoulders. She hadn't slept a full night in 4 days. The skin around her eyes felt like parchment. She was 29, but in this room, under these flickering fluorescent lights, she felt 50. The door kicked open. The rain howled for a second before the heavy metal slab slammed shut. Captain Cole Reynolds walked in. He was a SEAL, though he didn't wear a trident or a uniform that announced it. He wore mud-caked tactical pants and a black fleece. He looked like a man who had just watched his house burn down. His eyes were hollow, ringed with the kind of deep, bruised purple that only comes from sustained adrenaline and impending loss. Behind him came 2 other operators, carrying a portable tactical screen. The low murmur of the room died. Officers and flight crew sat up straighter. Nora didn't move her boots, but she lowered her coffee cup. Reynolds didn't bother with a salute or an introduction. He plugged a tough book into the screen, and a topographical map flashed up, glowing with violent red icons. 3 hours ago, Reynolds started, his voice a low gravel drag. A reconnaissance element, call sign Voodoo 1, was compromised in the Korengal Basin. They were hunting a high-value target. The intel was bad. They walked into a reinforced battalion. Reynolds hit a button. The map zoomed in on a tight, jagged V shape. They fell back to this ravine. It's a box canyon, 3 sides of sheer rock. The enemy has the high ground. Voodoo 1 is currently pinned down by heavy DSHK fire, mortars, and RPGs. They have 6 wounded, 2 critical, and they are out of water. The base commander, a balding colonel who lived for regulations, stood up. Captain, we already reviewed this. We can't get artillery in there because of the rock overhang. And Weather Command has grounded all rotary wing assets. The cloud ceiling is at 400 feet. The wind shear in that valley will tear a Black Hawk apart before it even gets close. I don't need a Black Hawk, Reynolds said, staring dead at the colonel. I need an airstrike. I need close air support to break the bunker complex at the mouth of the ravine so my guys can break out. The air boss, sitting 2 rows ahead of Nora, shook his head. It's a non-starter, Reynolds. You know the anti-air threat. We've got satellite thermal showing at least 4 radar-guided ZSU-23 emplacements on the ridges, plus man pads. Any jet that comes in above the cloud deck can't see the target to drop precision ordnance. Any jet that drops below the cloud deck gets shredded by the ZSUs in seconds. So we drop a JDAM through the clouds and pray, Reynolds countered. The proximity of your men to the enemy forces is less than 50 meters, the air boss fired back. A blind drop will kill Voodoo 1 just as fast as the enemy will. The room fell silent. It was the silence of men doing the grim, immovable math of modern warfare. The weather was a wall. The anti-air was a wall. The topography was a wall. Reynolds looked at the floor for a long moment. When he looked back up, The quiet desperation in his eyes made Nora's stomach tighten. He wasn't looking at the officers anymore. He was scanning the room, looking at the faces in the shadows. "I have 12 men in that mud," Reynolds said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that carried perfectly over the rattling air conditioner. "They are going to die in the next 45 minutes. I need a bird in that canyon, not above it, in it, flying below the radar net, visual on the target, guns only, no computers, no standoff range." The air boss scoffed. "You're asking someone to fly a jet at 300 knots in a thunderstorm inside a rock canyon at night into a wall of flak." Reynolds didn't blink. He just asked the room. "Any combat aviators here?" the SEAL captain asked. Nora pulled her boots off the chair. The rubber soles hit the plywood floor with a dull thud. She stood up. The folding chair scraped loudly behind her. Reynolds' eyes locked onto her. He saw a woman with messy, shoulder-length brown hair tied in a hasty bun, wearing a rumpled green flight suit. She didn't posture. She didn't march to the front of the room. She just looked at the map, then at the desperate SEAL. And she whispered, "Phoenix." The air boss spun around. "Captain Kelly, sit down, you're off rotation. And you fly an A-10, you're too slow to survive that valley." "The A-10 is the only thing that can survive that valley," Nora said flatly, ignoring the air boss and walking slowly down the aisle toward the tactical screen. "An F-15 is too fast. They'd fly into the canyon wall before they could line up a strafing run. The Warthog can turn tight. It can take the hits." "It's suicide," the base commander barked. "I am not authorizing a suicide sortie, Captain." Nora stopped at the front of the room. She looked at Reynolds. "You've got ZSUs on the north and south ridges?" she asked him. "Yes," Reynolds said. "If I come in low from the east, hugging the deck, the ridge itself masks me from their radar until I'm inside the box." Nora traced a finger along the digital topography. "I pull up hard here, 30 degrees. It bleeds my speed, but it gives me a 2-second window to put the nose down and bracket the bunker with the 30mm. Then I dump flares, brake hard left over the saddle, and pray the man pads are looking the wrong way." Reynolds stared at her. "You've flown this canyon." 2 years ago, Nora lied. She had studied it on a map once when she was bored. "Captain Kelly," the colonel interrupted, his voice rising, "I am giving you a direct order to stand down. You are not spooling up a $30 million aircraft for a statistically impossible rescue." Nora finally turned to the colonel. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The exhaustion in her tone carried its own heavy authority. "Colonel, with all due respect, I am the squadron commander of the 74th Fighter Squadron on this base. My jets are under my operational control until Theater Command says otherwise. Theater Command is asleep in Qatar. By the time they wake up, those 12 men will be dead. So, you can court-martial me tomorrow. But tonight, I'm going flying." She looked back at Reynolds. "Get on the radio. Tell Voodoo 1 to keep their heads down. It's going to get loud." The flight line was a swamp of jet fuel, rain, and screaming engines. Nora walked out into the deluge, her helmet bag slung over her shoulder. The rain immediately soaked through her flight suit, chilling her to the bone. She didn't care. The cold sharpened her mind, burning away the residual fatigue. The A-10 Thunderbolt II sat on the tarmac like a blunt, ugly weapon of war. It wasn't sleek. It wasn't beautiful. It was a massive, twin-engine flying gun built around the 30-foot-long GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon. The crew chief, a 20-year-old kid named Dempsey, was waiting at the ladder. He was drenched, his reflective belt glowing weakly in the floodlights. "She's fueled and armed, Captain," Dempsey shouted over the roar of the wind. "Full combat load, 1,150 rounds of high-explosive incendiary." "Thanks, Dempsey," Nora yelled back, climbing the ladder. She dropped into the cockpit. The titanium bathtub. The A-10's cockpit was encased in 1,200 pounds of titanium armor, designed to stop anti-aircraft fire from shredding the pilot. Tonight, she was going to test the limits of that engineering. She strapped in. The familiar heavy clicks of the harnesses over her shoulders and lap grounded her. She plugged her helmet into the comms line. "Tower, this is Hog 1-1. Requesting immediate taxi and unrestricted climb to Angels 5. I have an emergency CAS mission. Hog 1-1, Tower. Weather is black. Crosswinds at 25 knots. We are advising against departure." "Advisory noted, Tower. I'm rolling." Nora hit the auxiliary power unit. The APU screamed to life, a high-pitched whine that vibrated through the airframe. She spooled up the twin GE TF-34 turbofan engines. The low, guttural rumble shook the cockpit. She didn't bother waiting for a full systems warm-up. Time was blood. She pushed the throttles forward. The massive jet lurched out of its revetment, the nose wheel splashing through deep puddles of muddy water. There was no time for fear. Fear was a luxury for the briefing room. In the cockpit, there was only procedure, geometry, and physics. She lined up on the runway. The rain was sheeting across the canopy so hard it was blinding. She watched the instruments. "Brakes off." She shoved the dual throttles to the firewall. The A-10 roared, pushing her back into the ejection seat. The runway lights blurred into a smeared yellow streak. The airframe rattled violently as it fought the crosswinds. "Rotate." She pulled back on the stick. The heavy nose lifted. The wheels left the tarmac. Instantly, she was swallowed by the black belly of the storm. The turbulence was a physical assault. The jet violently dropped 10 feet, then surged upwards, battered by the invisible fists of the wind shear. Nora fought the stick, her muscles straining against the hydraulic resistance. It was pitch black outside the canopy. She was flying entirely on instruments. She leveled out at 500 feet, skimming just below the thickest part of the cloud deck. "Voodoo 1, this is Hog 1-1. How copy?" She spoke into her mask. Static hissed in her ears, followed by the frantic, breathless voice of a man who knew he was dying. "Hog 1-1, this is Voodoo Actual. We are pinned down behind a rock berm. We're taking fire from a fortified bunker at our 12 o'clock, distance 100 meters. They are chewing us to pieces. Where are you?" "Voodoo, I am 3 minutes out. Keep your heads down. I am coming in hot and blind." Nora checked her navigation display. The terrain radar was painting a terrifying picture. She was flying into a narrow gorge. The digital canyon walls on her screen were closing in like a vice. She reached down and flicked the master arm switch to hot. She selected the cannon. The HUD, head-up display, glowed green against the black glass of the canopy, displaying the Piper, the aiming reticle for the gun. "Warning, obstacle," the automated bitching Betty voice chimed in her headset. Nora gritted her teeth. She dropped the nose, descending to 200 feet. The radar altimeter spun downward. 150 feet, 100 feet. She was flying through a winding mountain pass in total darkness, relying entirely on a digital map and her own reflexes to not plow 30 tons of metal into solid granite. Suddenly, her radar warning receiver, RWR, shrieked. A high-pitched strobing tone drilled into her ears. "The beep, 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 beep. ZSU tracking," she muttered, her breathing harsh inside the oxygen mask. The anti-air batteries on the ridges above had found her through the storm. She didn't pop up. If she climbed, they would shred her. She pushed the stick forward, hugging the deck even tighter. 50 feet. She was flying so low, the jet wash was likely snapping the tops off the pine trees. The RWR tone broke, turning into static as she masked the jet behind a ridge. She was inside the box canyon now. Voodoo Actual, Hog 1-1. I am in the pipe, popping up in 5 seconds. Mark the target. Target marked. IR strobe on the bunker. Nora pulled back hard on the stick. The G-force slammed down on her, crushing her chest. The G-suit inflated around her legs, squeezing the blood back up to her brain. The A-10 shot upward through the rain, cresting the inner ridge of the canyon. For the first time she had visual. Below her, the canyon was lit up by the strobing flashes of gunfire. It looked like a handful of fireflies trapped in a bottle, violently trying to kill each other. She saw the faint, flashing infrared strobe from the SEAL's position, and 100 meters ahead of it, the heavy, constant muzzle flashes of the DSHK heavy machine guns firing from the bunker. She inverted the jet, rolling upside down to pull the nose down toward the earth, then rolled back level. The maneuver was violent, nearly throwing her neck out of alignment. The target was in her HUD. The Piper rested perfectly over the flashing enemy muzzle fire, but the sky around her instantly lit up. Neon streams of red and green tracers erupted from the darkness on the canyon walls, converging on her jet. It looked like a dozen fire hoses spraying liquid light. The ZSUs had a visual. She didn't flinch. She didn't break off. She held the stick steady, keeping the Piper on the bunker. Time to go to work, Nora whispered. She squeezed the trigger on the stick. The jet shuddered violently as the GAU-8 Avenger cannon spun up. It fired 4,000 rounds a minute. The sound inside the cockpit was a deafening, terrifying roar, a mechanical belch that vibrated deep into her marrow. A stream of high-explosive depleted uranium shells, each the size of a milk bottle, poured from the nose of the aircraft. She watched the impact. The earth around the bunker erupted in a massive churning wall of fire, rock, and dust. The 30-millimeter shells didn't just hit the bunker, they erased it. The concrete shattered. The muzzle flashes instantly ceased, swallowed by the sheer kinetic devastation of the gun run. But the sky above her was still full of fire. Beep, 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 beep. The RWR tone went flat and solid. A missile launch warning. Missile, 6 o'clock, the automated voice said calmly. Nora slammed the throttles, punched the flare dispenser, and ripped the stick to the left, pulling the A-10 into a gut-wrenching 90-degree bank directly toward the jagged rock wall of the canyon. The magnesium flares burst from the dispensers in brilliant, blinding white streaks, burning at 2,000 degrees. Nora didn't watch them. She kept her eyes locked on the altimeter and the jagged black outline of the canyon wall rushing to meet her canopy. She held the 90-degree bank, letting the jet bleed speed, trading altitude for a desperate, violent turn. The heat-seeking missile bit on the flares. It detonated 50 yards behind her right wing. The shockwave hit the A-10 like a physical blow from a giant. The airframe slammed sideways. Nora's helmet smashed against the canopy glass, stars exploding in her peripheral vision. A sickening, metallic screech tore through the cockpit as the right wing took the brunt of the concussive blast and the accompanying shrapnel. The master caution panel lit up like a Christmas tree. Warning horns blared. The digital displays flickered and died for a terrifying half-second before rebooting. Right engine fire. Right engine fire, the automated voice stated, completely devoid of the panic currently flooding Nora's veins. She leveled the wings with brute force. The stick felt like it was set in wet concrete. The hydraulic pressure in the right wing was bleeding out into the night sky. Muscle memory took over. She chopped the right throttle to idle, pulled the fire T-handle, and hit the extinguisher discharge button. She didn't look back to see if it worked. If the fire reached the fuel tanks, she would be a smear of carbon on the canyon floor. She shoved the left throttle forward, demanding every ounce of thrust the remaining GE TF-34 engine could give her. The A-10 shuddered, heavily listing to the right. It was a flying tank, but a tank was still heavy. With one engine dead and half the hydraulics gone, the jet was flying with the aerodynamic grace of a falling brick. She fought the trim, her arm screaming from the effort to keep the nose pitched up. She clawed her way out of the box canyon, cresting the ridge at 300 feet. The anti-air batteries fired blindly into the dark, but the terrain masked her retreat. She was out of the kill box. Nora sucked in a ragged breath of pure oxygen from her mask. Her hands were shaking violently. The adrenaline dump was leaving her system, replaced by cold, hard exhaustion. "Voodoo Actual, Hog 1-1, she rasped into the comms, her voice raw. "Talk to me." The radio hissed. For 5 endless seconds, there was only static. Nora closed her eyes. If she had dropped that ordnance 50 feet too short, she had just vaporized 12 Americans. Then, a voice broke through. It wasn't the frantic dying man from before. It was a low, breathless pant. "Hog 1-1, Voodoo Actual, good hits, good hits. The bunker is gone. We are moving. We have the wounded, pushing to the extraction point." A pause, then softer. "Thanks for the roof, Phoenix." "Copy that, Voodoo. Get home." Nora slumped back into the ejection seat. The smell of burning electrical wiring began to seep into the cockpit through the environmental control system. The acrid smoke stung her eyes. She checked her fuel. She had barely enough to make it back to the forward operating base. She was flying on one engine, the controls fighting her every inch of the way in a thunderstorm. It was going to be a long 40 minutes. "Tower, Hog 1-1, Nora transmitted, fighting the heavy yoke. "Declare in-flight emergency. I've lost the right engine, right wing damage. Hydraulics compromised. I'm bringing her in." "Copy, Hog 1-1. Emergency crews are spooling up. Winds are still 25 knots across the deck. Do you need to divert?" "Negative, Tower. I don't have the fuel or the altitude. I'm putting her down here." The flight back was an exercise in slow, agonizing torture. Every gust of wind threatened to flip the unbalanced aircraft. Nora flew with both hands on the stick, her shoulders burning, her boots heavy on the rudder pedals just to keep the jet flying straight. She didn't think about the SEALs. She didn't think about the colonel who was probably drafting her court-martial papers. She only thought about airspeed and altitude. Through the rain-streaked canopy, the faint yellow glow of the runway approach lights finally bled through the storm. She dropped the landing gear. The left main gear locked. The nose gear locked. The right main gear indicator stayed stubbornly dark. Nora cursed silently. She hit the manual gear extension, pumping the handle hard. She felt a heavy thud beneath her feet. The green light flickered, then held steady. "Tower, Hog 1-1 is on final." She had no flaps. The approach was hot and fast. The runway rushed up at her, slick with standing water and reflecting the harsh glare of the floodlights. The crosswind caught the damaged right wing, violently pushing the nose off the center line. Nora kicked the left rudder hard, crabbing the massive jet into the wind. 50 feet, 30 feet, 10. She chopped the remaining throttle. The heavy main tires slammed onto the concrete. The jet bounced once, throwing Nora violently against her restraints, before settling hard. The right tire hydroplaned on the wet tarmac. The A-10 swerved violently toward the mud beside the runway. Nora stood on the brakes. The anti-skid system chattered furiously, fighting for grip. The smell of burning rubber and overheated carbon brakes filled the cockpit. The jet screeched, shuddered, and finally rolled to a heavy, sluggish stop a mere 10 feet from the dirt. Nora let go of the stick. Her hands fell into her lap. She sat in the darkness of the cockpit, listening to the rain hammer against the glass and the ticking of the cooling metal. She didn't unstrap. She just breathed. The fire trucks were there in seconds, bathing the crippled A-10 in flashing red and yellow lights. Fire crews in silver proximity suits sprayed foam over the smoking right engine casing. Nora popped the canopy. The cold, wet air rushed in, sweeping away the smell of smoke and sweat. It felt like breathing ice. Dempsey, the crew chief, pushed past a firefighter and scrambled up the ladder. His face was pale under the floodlights. He looked at the massive, jagged holes punched through the right wing. The shredded metal curled back like peeled tin. "Captain," Dempsey stammered, his eyes wide. "You brought it back." "I told you I would, Dempsey," Nora said, her voice flat, devoid of any Hollywood heroism. She unbuckled her harness with clumsy, stiff fingers. "She needs a little sheet metal work." She climbed down the ladder. Her legs felt like lead. When her boots hit the tarmac, her knees buckled slightly. She caught herself on the landing gear strut, steadying her breathing. The flight line was a chaotic mess of screaming APUs and shouting ground crews. Nora grabbed her helmet bag and began the long walk back to the squadron operations center. She didn't look at the jet. She didn't want to see what she had survived. She pushed through the heavy metal doors of the operations building. The fluorescent lights were blinding. The air was stale. The base commander was standing by the scheduling desk. He looked at her. He looked at her soaked flight suit, the bruised ring around her neck from the G-suit, and the dead, hollow look in her eyes. The anger that had been boiling in him during the briefing seemed to evaporate into the tired reality of a war zone. He didn't yell. He didn't mention the court-martial. He just gave a slow, exhausted nod and walked away. The paperwork could wait for morning. Survival was its own defense. Nora walked down the narrow plywood hallway toward the break room. She wanted that cold coffee. She wanted to sit in a chair that wasn't trying to kill her. As she turned the corner, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Captain Cole Reynolds. He was still covered in mud. His black fleece was soaked. He looked just as terrible as he had 2 hours ago, but the frantic desperation was gone from his posture. He leaned against the wall, holding a battered green thermos. Nora stopped. They stared at each other in the harsh hallway light. Two ghosts haunting the same muddy forward operating base. "Voodoo Actual got back 20 minutes ago," Reynolds said quietly. His voice was raw, stripped of command presence, leaving only the gravelly exhaustion of a man who had stared into the abyss and been pulled back. "Medical has the wounded. The docs say they're going to make it." Nora nodded. She didn't smile. She just shifted her heavy helmet bag to her other shoulder. "Good." Reynolds pushed off the wall. He took a step toward her. He didn't offer a salute. The space between them didn't require military protocol. It required something far older and simpler. He unscrewed the lid of his thermos and poured a cup of steaming black coffee. He held it out to her. "I don't have a medal to give you, Phoenix," Reynolds said, looking her dead in the eye. "And the brass is probably going to try and hang you for taking that bird out." Nora took the cup. The heat soaked through her frozen, stiff fingers. It was the best thing she had ever felt. I don't fly for the brass, Nora said quietly. She took a sip. It was bitter, strong, and perfectly hot. Reynolds watched her for a second. The corner of his mouth twitched, a micro-expression of profound, anchoring gratitude. He didn't offer a dramatic speech. The reality of their world didn't leave room for it. They both knew the math. She had traded her life for 12 others, and the universe had simply forgotten to collect the debt. Get some sleep, Captain, Reynolds said. He turned and walked down the hallway, fading back into the grim machinery of the base. Nora stood alone in the hall. She took another slow drink of the coffee. Her neck throbbed. Her hands still trembled slightly. Outside, the rain continued to batter the tin roof of the operations center, an endless, drumming reminder of the world they fought in. She turned and walked into the break room, found an empty chair in the corner, and finally sat down. She had cheated the math tonight. Tomorrow, the war would ask for the bill again, but for now, the coffee was hot, and she was still breathing. If this story gripped you, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dive combat narratives. The reality of close air support is brutal, and the pilots who fly these missions are built differently. Share this video with someone who appreciates the raw, unfiltered truth of military aviation and the A-10 Warthog. Drop a comment below. Would you have taken that desperate flight? Turn on notifications so you never miss a sortie. We'll see you on the next mission.